Hi everyone. Myself Bhageshri, and welcome to again in my interview series question answer on the multiple company which I already appeared and what the question I face. I'm going to share here, which will be going to help you all and for the your upcoming interview preparation and take a lessons, take a answer from this video and crack your next job. Okay, so let's start with that. Before moving ahead, just I'm requesting you please like, share, subscribe this channel, and that will be motivating me for creating a such type of content. And again, I will be going to share my other experience also. So let's start with that. What are the some key difference between the .NET framework and .NET Core? Then you can give the answer like the .NET framework can run only the Windows at the same time. .NET Core is a cross-platform and can run on the Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And .NET Core basically a open source, while the .NET framework is a proprietary. What I can say, .NET Core does not include all the library that .NET framework has. Then next question, explain what the dependency injection is in .NET Core and how it is work in the .NET Core. So dependency injection is a technique. It is a .NET Core to achieve loose coupling between the object and their dependency. Instead of directly initiating dependency, object declare dependency via constructor, property, or method argument, and the DI container inject the dependency. Means once you just create and have to be your object dependency from the another one. Next question we have, how entity framework code different from the entity framework 6. The entity framework core is a complete rewrite, while EF6 entity framework is built on previous EF version. EF code does not support the EF6 features like spatial data types, but it has improvement like better performance and flexibility. So EF code does not support the EF6. Then we have question like, what are the some advantages of using the asynchronous programming in the .NET? We have a communication asynchronous and asynchronous way. Everyone have a some positive way. What is the advantage of that when we are going with the async, when we are going with the sync? So the advantages of the async programming in the .NET include the improve the scalability and throughput, better utilization of the system resources, and enhance the perceived performance in the UI thread is not blocked. This is the example. This is the like better way, benefit way I will say like in the async programming. Then you have to be like how you implement logging in the .NET application. So I am already using Serilog inbuilt login mechanism in the .NET Core. So I can use built-in login framework like nlog, log4net, and Serilog and can be used. And I can do the configuration in the appsetting.json, creating log or ilogger classes, and use the injectable logging services to generate the log and level like debug, info, warn, error, and fatal. What is the information? What is the key property I have to be taken from the error one or logging purpose? So I will just take from that method. Next we have, how do you manage the application secret and configuration in the .NET project? For the secret storing purpose in the source code, using the managing tool, environment variable, Azure Key Vault, or tools like .NET use secret for development. And for the configuration, I using the app setting.json environment variable command line argument etc. So this will be beneficial for storing your secret things in your applications. And then they will ask like, what are some key principle of clean code you are following? So some clean code principle I follow, including using meaningful name of the variable, method name, avoiding the duplicate code, limiting the code complexity or nesting, modularization, loose coupling, separation of concern, avoiding the hard-coded value, formatting code consistency, and more. Okay. If you are a good developer, you have to be follow this thing. The next question, how do we ensure that the .NET Core is a performant? So I do this by running benchmark, analyzing the performance matrices routinely, monitoring resource uses, catching, running diagnostic tool like dot trace, optimizing the query using the appropriate data structure algorithm, and the multi-threading effectively. Then after the development, what you are developing, you have to be certain error and how you are handling that error. They are asking the questions in the application. I use the multiple method or approaches to handle the error in the .NET app. For instance, I will say like I can use a try catch block for the exception handling, and I ensure that have a meaningful catch block instead of the generic catches. Okay, you are developing application, you are following certain design patterns, so you have to be know which design pattern on your current project you are following, you are using, you are creating, and have to be knowledge on the basic other also. If you're not using but you have some idea on that, what is the design pattern etc that you are using. So some common design pattern I have used in the .NET include like singleton, factory, adapter, facet, observer, strategy, and decorator pattern. Basically, it is divided into three categories: creational, behavioral, structural. Basis on that, which we have to be suited for our application, for our organization, we have to be choose that design pattern and develop the applications. Then next we have like how do you implement the logging in your .NET from project. So again, the .NET project we have inbuilt method Serilog you can use. Otherwise, if you have some other one like Fluent API, also one of the thing which we can use for the validation. Then next question we have like how do you profile memory uses in a .NET application? I mainly use the performance profiling tool like Do Memory and NTS Memory Profiler. I generate memory snapshot at different code points, analyze the snapshot to find the biggest object memory leaks and fragmented heap issues and GC classes to get the memory detail programmatically. The next question we have like what are the some principle you follow for writing unit test in .NET? I believe that tests should be independent, repeatable, and well organized. Therefore, focus on one objective, avoid duplicates, and follow the AAA pattern for arrange, act, and assert. And I also using the dependency, fake data access, and separate fixture setup for tear down from the tested. And unit test, mock data, or TDD, or end-to-end integration test approach. I already using. I'm right now also in the current project I'm using. Then question we have like how do you configure different app setting for the development, QA, and production environment in the .NET? I usually have a separate app setting files like app setting development JSON file, app setting QA file, and set app ASP.NET Core environment variable to the environment name. By doing this, the correct file will be loaded at a runtime. Okay, the next question we have what are the some most important C# language features? I would say like link you async await, nullable reference type, pattern matching, interpolated string, generic properties, indexer, extension method are the most important for the building complex application functionality and behavior. If you don't know about the like what is the pattern matching, what is the generic property, what is the indexer, what is the nullable reference type, please comment it down. I will be creating a separate video for this topic, which will be you are getting a broad idea with the using some practical questions and practical program also. Next question we have how do we handle the multi-language support in the ASP.NET Core application? I mainly use the resource file for each language configured by the iString localizer, and I store language specific string in a separate resource file and implement the localization and middleware to route the requested based on the language header cookie and preference. Next question we have how do you implement the caching in .NET application? I can do in memory caching using the memory cache class, distributed caching using the Redis or SQL Server cache, caching at the HTTP level using the response caching middleware, and caching at the database query level using the EF second level caching. Next question we have what are the difference between the abstract classes and interfaces in the .NET? Um, in the abstract class can have implementation while interface cannot have. At the same time, a class can inherit only one abstract class but can implement multiple interfaces. So abstract class can state while interfaces cannot. How do you ensure that scalability in your .NET application? For that, I can implement the horizontal scaling using the load balancer and reverse proxy like Nginx. I also enable caching, making good use of the async processing, optimizing database and queries, and use messaging background worker for long running tasks. Okay, next question we have a what practice do you follow for writing secure .NET code? I religiously follow input validation, sanitization, parameterized query to prevent the SQL injection, encode user output to prevent the XSX, avoid hard coding secret, use HTTPS, implement role-based authorization and authentication of users, and avoid the insecurity serialization, among other defensive coding best practices. Next question we have what are the some principle you follow while designing a .NET API? I use RESTful concept, logical naming and versioning of the endpoint, appropriate status code and headers, and also support the common operation like CRUD. And I also follow the standard like open API space, gracefully handling errors using the HTTP method and correctly, and making APIs discoverable for designing the .NET API. Next question they ask how do you implement the authentication and authorization in a .NET application? I use the ASP.NET Identity for managing the users, roles, token, etc. I also integrate with the OAuth OIDC providers like Azure ADA for seamless SSO. And I can also use the authorized attribute for method authorization, JWT token for API auth, store roles claim, and permission in a database or Azure Active Directory. Next, we have how do you handle the concurrency, conflict, and transaction management in the .NET? Through the use of transaction and isolation level while accessing the databases, I can use the log, mutex, and semaphore for the application level concurrency. I also handle the conflict by retrying transactions and fail due to the concurrency and critically ensure resource are thread safe. Next, we have a question how do you optimize the performance of entity framework code? I can use the index property for the frequency search columns, compile complex link query, and avoid the using of n plus 1 query issue by eager loading related data and use of the projection to limit data return. Then we have question on that troubleshooting. How do you troubleshoot runtime error in the .NET application? And on that, I can review the application logs and enable debugging to get the stack traces. Where needed, I use a debugger tool like GDB and attach the profiler to monitor resource uses. I can use tool like .trace and .memory for profiling. I have a tool like .traces and .profile .memory for profiling. Then we'll see what is the advantages of and disadvantages of the using ADO.NET. Some advantages in the ADO.NET include the performance, its ability to work offline, and strong typing. And its disadvantages include complexity in writing raw query and managing the connection ORM tool like Entity Framework solve these issues. Advantages like performance, we have to be first of all looking into that. If it is working offline, this have a good ability, strong typing, and disadvantages point of view like complexity and writing the raw queries and managing the connection. ORM tool like entity framework solve these issues. The next question we have how do you choose between ORM like entity framework and Hibernate and Dapper for a project? One can consider factors like application type, complexity, performance requirement, team skills, and productivity. For example, I would choose EF for complex business app, Dapper for the simplicity and performance, and Hibernate for the flexibility. Okay. The next question we have like how do you security store connection string in a dotted application? I can store connection string on an app config file with encryption or Azure Key Vault. One can also restrict access with the file secret permission and more importantly, completely avoid the hard-coded connection string. Then they are asked, what are the some way you can implement the object relational mapping in the .NET application? We can use the ORM tool like Entity Framework, and I can use a micro ORM like Dapper alongside in-house lightweight mappers. I normally also map object to store procs and area dotted with custom Dappers. Next question we have, how do you choose between code first and database first approach in Entity Framework? I would go database first if a database exists already. I only go code first for greenfield project for more flexibility, and the decision between the two also depend on the team's preference. Next question we have like explain how you implement the repository pattern using the entity framework. One can have a generic based repository implementing CRUD operation, and the interface define the repository method, and the concurrent repository inherit the base repository and operate on a specific entity, and repository abstract data access from the business logics. Next, we have a what are the some way to optimize the link view to entities queries. I use a compile query for reuse query and projected to limit return fields. One can also either load related entity and batch insert, update, delete operation. I usually turn off change tracking if not needed. So that is the optimization way. And again, they are asking like you handling the migration, how you handle the database migration in the .NET project. I also do. I am personally doing the EF course. So entity framework core migration to generate SQL script for incremental schema changes. Script can be applied to dev, test, and product environment. And this is useful for the team collaboration and DB versioning. Next, we have like explain how you implement a caching in .NET Core API to improve the performance. I implement output caching to catch response using the response cache attribute and use distributed cache like Redis for catching. And I can also use the like cache DB query using the EF second level or cache and memory cache for the application level caching. Okay, after that the question we have like how do you implement a background jobs and processing in .NET? I use the Azure Queue Storage with the Azure function or web jobs for the first and forget task. And for the recurrent tasks, I use the cron-based Azure web jobs. And for the complex workflow, I use the Azure to double functions like that. Next question we have a like what technique do you use for error handling in the ASP.NET Core Web API? Even though there might be multiple ways to do this, I mainly use the exception middleware to handle the exceptions centrally. My configuration return appropriate HTTP status code like 400 for the client and 500 for the server AS. Next, we have like how do we implement localization and um, ASP.NET Core MVC application. I use the resource file for each language culture and setting request culture via localization middleware. And one can use the localizer to access the localized string and implement routing constraint to detect culture from the URL when needed. And they can also use the data annotation for the culturally validated input. Again, you are developing the application, you have a certain performance issue, how you are handling. I mainly use the profiling tool like DoTrace and DoMemory and SQL Profiler also sometime for like database query related, and for monitoring performance counters I use tool like performance, and I also collect and analyze app insight telemetry data and routinely review servers and applications log. Next, we have like what technique do you use for the instrumenting and monitoring the .NET application? I mainly use the built-in health checker for ASP.NET Core, preference counter, and event tracing for the Windows. Then next question they ask about what are the some principles you follow while designing the multi-threaded application in the .NET. I make sure like I prevent race condition via the lock mutex semaphore, and I also make non-shareable data threaded local, avoid share state, and use the thread safe connections. Next question they ask like how do you ensure that .NET API design is scalable and performs well under the load? By implementing the caching compression, I will say pagination and making the API asynchronous end-to-end. One can offload work to queues and background worker, limit large requests, design idempotent fault-tolerant API, and scale horizontally at the infra level. Then next we have how do you avoid the n plus one query issue with the entity framework in .NET APIs? By eager loading related data, optimize lazy loading behavior through a proxy and make single batch query using includeds. And I can also use the projection into a limit data and implement the query caching. Next question we have what strategy do you use for migrating legacy .NET application to cloud platforms? The easiest and recommended method is to use lift and shift by redeploying on as VMs. You can also re-architect legacy application as a microservices on path, containerize and implement the CI/CD pipeline while addressing the security, scalability, and availability. How do you troubleshoot connectivity and deployed issues with the .NET apps on Azure? The first step is to review the Azure health status. Progressively, you can check network security group and app services log. Also, ensure that you enable diagnostic logging and work backward while testing failure requests. Okay, then next question they may have like what are the some way you integrate a .NET backend application with mobile apps? You can expose the API using the ASP.NET Web API and consuming using the HTTP client. Then you use the push notification via APNs and FCM and also implement the real-time communication over the web socket and authenticate users via Azure App Services and authentication. Next, we have what are the some tools you use for the testing .NET application. We have XUnit, AnUnit, and MSTest for the unit testing. I use the Selenium for the UI testing, but I can use other tools like Postman for API testing, Mock for mocking, ReSharper, Coversafe for code coverage, and Fiddle for the network testing. They ask like how do you implement a audit trail in the .NET Core application? You see, it is lots of question I face because I already holding a 8 year of experience on that. So they are expecting you have a some leading quality, you are managing quality in the depth knowledge of technical domain. So that's why they are asking all the aspect and what they can try. So for this question, implementation of the audit trail, I use the creating domain event for entity change and implement and append only audit log using a database table or external store. I also use the AOP interceptions to log event and ensure clock synchronization and automatically. Then they have a next question like how do you troubleshoot crash.NET process in production? Analyzing the crash dump using the debuggers and WinDBG. And I also enable the fail-safe default and graceful degradation. I also collect ETDW traces log leading up to crash and review application log as I reproduce the issue locally. Next question we have what technique do you use to identify performance bottlenecks in .NET Core? One can use profiling tools like .NET Trace and performance monitoring to get matters like memory allocation, I/O, and network uses. They can also analyze the garbage collection impact and review show and database queries. Okay. Then they have like what are the some way you implement distributed tracing in microservices architecture because I already working on the microservices. They have a question for that also. So for that I answered like I primarily propagate correction IDs across the services and uses the library like Open Telemetry to collect and express the traces. I also view distributed traces in AVM tool like App Insight in the Azure side. Then question we have like how do you implement the cross-cutting logging in the .NET application? So to implement the cross-cutting logging in a .NET application, I use an injectable logging services abstraction like iLogger. During the configuration, I set up the logger in appsetting.json file and then I access the logger in classes using the constructor injections. Next question have how do you validate user input in ASP.NET Core MVC application? To validate the user input in ASP.NET Core MVC application, I use the data annotation for the simple validation and fluent validation for the complex logic. And there is a way to write in the fluent validation, not like similar what we already do in the data annotation. What are the some way you can improve security in .NET application? I follow the best practices like input validation, sanitization using the parameterized query and encoding output to prevent injection attack. In the next question we have how you implementing the background task and workers in .NET 6. I implemented the background task and worker using the various methods for fire and forget tasks. I use the I hosted services, background services or threadful. For recurrent tasks, I rely on the cron-based time trigger with the Azure functions. Next question we have what technique do you use for the instrumenting and monitoring .NET distributed system? To instrument and monitor in the .NET distributed system, I implement the correlation ID to track requests across services. I use applications performance monitoring tool like App Insight to collect telemetry data, and I may also create the custom performance counter to monitor the specific matrices. Next question we have how can you improve the startup time of a .NET Core application? To improve the startup time of .NET Core application, I can use the ahead of time compilation to pre-compile the application. I also turn off unused services and middleware to reduce the unnecessary overhead. Okay, then we have a health monitoring for the .NET system, how you are implementing. So for implementing health monitoring in .NET system, I expose the health check endpoints and validating the applications dependency. Basis on that, I just check. Then we have a question on that strategy design pattern in C Sharp. So to implement the strategy design and in C Sharp, first define the interface for the strategy or algorithm, then create the concrete strategy implementation that implement the interfaces, then the strategy object encapsulate the different algorithm. Next question we have how can you troubleshoot and debug a .NET application crashing in a production environment? I think I already told about this, yeah. Then they ask about what is the some way you can make sure that the .NET code is performant. So for that we ensure that my .NET code is performant and I benchmark critically path to identify potential bottlenecks and I monitor the performance counter related to memory uses, CPU utilization and network state to identify area for the improvement. And I use profiling tool to analyze the code execution and final performance hotspot. So these are the way they are expecting the question. You can expect the question and have to be give the answer like this. Hope you got the idea about the preparation and meet you in the next video. Till then, bye. Happy coding. Keep learning. Keep related relevant to the technology. Thank you all of you. Bye. Please like, share, subscribe this channel. Bhagyashree Tech.